Hello, welcome to the second recording of this week, and it's a bloody warm one. My office is a bloody hotbox, so I'm recording this a little bit later than I promised in my first recording. I did promise for this release to be on Thursday. It's now Friday, the 11th of July. Forgive me, my week just got away from me, and like I said, we're experiencing something of a heat wave in the United Kingdom, and it's just... I'm Irish. It's very unbearable. So we're going to get right to it then. This is the second recording this week of classism, and we're just going to continue the discussion into what this theory is in the more modern sense, is the purpose of this video. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap, first of all, on what was the previous video earlier in the week, just to bring us up to speed, and then lead us into a few contemporary considerations of classicism in our more modern era. So if we remember, if you've watched it and if we remember, classicism did emerge as a response to the kind of more arbitrary and feudal societies in Europe which existed during the pre-Enlightenment era. So I'm not going to dwell on, the points on this particular slide too much. The whole recording earlier in the week was predominantly on this, but there was a growing dissatisfaction with the way that things were, which eventually led to the Enlightenment and then subsequently great changes, sweeping changes throughout Europe eventually. And this had an impact as well on the formation of what would become the United States of America. And you can see that in the Declaration and those who drafted it. You can see the kind of the European influence there in that, but that's perhaps a story for another day. But nevertheless, during this era, we had key thinkers of classicism, particularly Caesar Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham. One Beccaria inspiring the other, Bentham, and they advocated for, or this wild notion that people had free will and rational choice. That we were able to weigh up the pros and the cons. Bentham furthered those notions put forward by Beccaria, but they didn't see eye to eye on everything. But they did advocate for measurements being applied to punishment, proportional punishment being necessary, and that done right, the sort of deterrent factor of punishment should shine through and should be a front runner of consideration for the administration of any sort of form of punishment. Bentham talked about hedonism. So whenever we weigh up pros and cons of our behavior, we do so rather selfishly, I would say, in that we sort of try to think about what's going to be the best outcome for me, assess the situation with all the known information that we have, and then make a decision accordingly. So it works off this kind of pleasure-pain principle when it comes to crime. What is the likelihood of me getting caught? What is the punishment if and when I get caught? Things like this. So we have this ability for rational choice and to weigh up calculated decisions. And this, by these two philosophers and many others at this time, but we're focusing this week on particularly these two. It was a break from the grip of religious teaching. So this strain of philosophy was very different from what was before. In terms of criminal behavior, a lot of particularly the worst crimes were largely attributed to evil and demonic forces and what have you. So this was a bit of a clean break from that. So look, on the era within the previous video, I highlighted a few of the strengths and weaknesses of this particular theory in that it brought in, a different way of thinking. It was quite a basic concept by today's standards, but nevertheless, it was groundbreaking nearly at the time. It was revolutionary. And again, you can see the influence in this line of thought within changes that would eventually come in places like France, in Britain, and in what would become then the formation of the United States of America. And today, in this little video, we're going to examine how classicism is still alive and well. It is still with us. It is still part of the way that we think about people, behavior, the way that we approach punishment, and as we're going to see, other forms of crime deterrence. So it is still alive and well. We're going to look at, and we did look at, in part in the previous video, some theorists who brought to the table, Cornish and Clark, for example, who brought to the table advanced neoclassicism theories in the form of rational choice, routine activity, and we're going to lean more into today situational crime prevention. I will do a little bit more on the previous two, but we're going to lean that bit more into situational crime prevention. So the neoclassical era kind of took off. I mean, it's always hard to put an exact timeline on, when it was kind of back in fashion again. But let's say around the 1960s, 70s, perhaps we started to see a bit more of a neoclassical era emerge. And what this meant was that owing to scientific advancements and just, pick your reason, really, it became fashionable again, I suppose, in academic criminological realms to reconsider the early notions of classicism. And the additions of the likes of rational choice and routine activity and what have you, where we were privy then to being able to apply scientific research methodology. So one of the limitations of the philosophies of Beccaria and Bentham is that there wasn't very much scientific research applied. And simply because it wasn't really known for scientific research to be applied to such notions at that time. We will move on in the next or within next week's videos to the positivist era, when there was an adoption of scientific research methods into what we would now term as being the social sciences, particularly when we think about sociology and trying to understand society better. Classicism, where we move on to next week, is where we really see that adoption of scientific research methods come to the fore. By the time we get to neoclassicism, it's very much part and parcel of what we do as criminologists, sociologists, social scientists. So we're able to rapidly advance what was the early notions put forward by the likes of Beccaria and Bentham. So we're going to move now to consider some more modern considerations in today's video. I'll give perhaps no, you know what? It was in there for a bit of a recap. I feel like I've adequately done that. I'm looking down through my notes for what is the next slide, but I feel like I do what I do in lectures and I've kind of added into the next slide. But I feel like if you've watched the previous video, you're not really going to want to sit and listen to me rehash again, I don't think. I'm just looking down through my notes, see if there's anything in particular that we might want to discuss. Maybe I feel like if there's anything I feel like I didn't quite cover in detail enough. No, I think we did. I think we're okay. So if you basically if you want a more sort of deeper dive rundown, please refer back to my first recording on classicism for the early emergence of. But I'm going to skip the recap, which will be my next slide, and we're going to go to thinking more about situational crime prevention. And there is a selected reading from this week, and I'll get to that at a later point in this recording. But I'm aware that I'm privy, owing to university access, that I can get I can get into journals and books and what have you that are paywalled for a lot of people who don't have university privileges, shall we say. So I'm going to be more kind of providing a reference for a journal. I'll be doing this most weeks. If you have access to it, great. If not, by the time you're watching this, hopefully, because I've got no paid subscribers at the moment, but by the time you get round to subscribing, you will done because you'll be watching this then. I will hopefully have sorted out a mechanism where I can share some things with you. I don't, because of copyright infringement, don't ever think that I will be able to share full PDFs. If they're paywalled, they're paywalled. It'd be piracy, it'd be copyright for me to do that. Nevertheless, I might be able to drop in some other kind of, more fulfilled summaries and what have you of some particular sources. But nevertheless, I'll be able to give you the reference and you'll know exactly where the discussion points are coming from. But I'll get more to that whenever we sort of reach that point. So look, I'm going to skip this. Typically, if this was a class, I would ask my group these questions, and we would openly discuss the responses. And again, I've adequately, I feel, covered a lot of this in my previous recording. So for the sake of keeping this one a little bit shorter, I am just going to leapfrog this particular slide, and we're going to take the notions of what was Tuesday's recording released to you, and I am going to instead jump now to policy and practice implications, and we're going to go straight into situational crime prevention. So actually, I'll tell you what, we will. Is there anything on here for... No, actually, there's not. I didn't put anything on here for rationality, for rational choice theory and routine activities. But nevertheless, we'll discuss this anyway. So as a reminder point, rational choice theory was a bit more of a scientific application by the likes of Cornish and Clarke to try and advance the early notions of Beccaria and Bentham, to try and scientifically show how people come to weigh up the pros and the cons, make hedonistic decisions, and how this might be relevant to criminal enterprise, shall we say. Talking about, a motivated offender and the right situations and the lack of maybe security mechanisms and what have you. All these things kind of need to be in alignment to allow for criminal motivations to fester. It kind of purports that we all have the ability to commit crime, which in theory, I suppose they're right. Anybody able-bodied, shall we say, can commit a crime. It's... I don't want to say it's within us, that might be reaching, but physically speaking, I suppose we can commit crime. In the right circumstances, and we're going to discuss this in later weeks, we'll say strain theories. Under the right circumstances, we may well feel the pressure enough to commit a crime like burglary. Let's say we fall on hard times and we are just at the sort of at wit's end. We don't have a lot of money. We have no money. We're quite hungry. I'm painting a bit of a word picture here, but anyway, we're in dire straits. That might well be a situation that through just sheer hard luck we find ourselves in, and where I was always law-abiding as a person. Now I find myself in a situation where, to alleviate the strains, to alleviate the kind of hardship and the misery that I'm going through, here presents itself an opportunity for me to nick something of monetary value, and that might well pay next month's mortgage or something like that. So the it's not far-reaching, I don't think, to state that within the right circumstances, we all have the ability to commit crime. I think that's a fair assessment. We might well go through our lives completely law-abiding, but perhaps we've not faced the right circumstances. So that was kind of an overarching notion from Cornish and Clarke. And then they went in to discuss as well routine activities and outline the changes to society's routines. And this is where it kind of crosses in quite more heavily perhaps with sociology. They discussed the great changes post 1945, the close of the Second World War. How, and again, I do discuss this in theories that are coming up, like radical Marxist theories, and indeed even strain theories and anime and strain and what have you. So there's plenty of discussion on this and more context to this. But for now, yeah, we got better in terms of equality, I suppose, and better social provisions in the sort of what I would call the Great Rebuild after World War II in the United Kingdom. People were generally better looked after because we established true and proper safety nets through the welfare state, health service, education, housing reforms, all of that was getting better. And also alongside that was commerce and business and trade and just job growth and all of that. So because of these changes, the sort of more traditional way of doing things was beginning to change alongside. The traditional way of sort of rearing a family was changing. Owing to World War II, and indeed World War I to an extent as well, great extent actually, when the men were off fighting on the battlefront, a lot of women then took up jobs in factories and wherever else where there was a lack of workforce. And in the post-World Wars, peacetime era, there was a recognition then that actually, owing to capitalist desires for mass production and consumption, it might well be better if we enticed more people, women and as well as men, into the workforce. And because of that, I mean, I'm being very sort of over broad here, but nevertheless, all of these changes induce changes in the way that we do things, and it's continued since. I mean, we've seen rapid changes to the family unit and the family way of doing things from the 1950s up until now. There's a number of ways that we have changed, and this was noted by the likes of Cornish and Clark because they pick up on these changes to routine or more routine activities. And again, this is just one part of their theory, but these changes create an opportunity or have created opportunities for, let's say, burglary. Sort of crime of the week, shall we say, burglary. This is a good example for a few of the things I'm going to discuss. In that, if both parents are out of the house during the day, kids are in school, the house is vacant. And it creates an opportunity for a willing offender, or that desperate person who's never been an offender before but has found himself on hard times, is walking down the street and glances an opportunity for some monetary reward to alleviate their suffrage. So, a lot of changes post-World War II. And again, it's changes that I will, for different reasons, but there's an interlink here. And I'll be mindful of, say, the strain of theoretical emergence at particular intervals with theories down through the weeks. But the concepts of early theorists in classical criminology, they were groundbreaking at the time, and they have maintained their usefulness since, even though we would look at them now and think, well, yeah, of course, but they still are a consideration in how we try to rationale the behaviors of people. And there are, of course, contemporary variations, such as the bounded rationality and routine activities theories. So furthering on from where they, from the points that we've kind of rehashed on those, with regards to those neoclassical theories, it is essential to examine maybe modern policy implications and the practices that stem from these theories and theorists in the more modern sense. So by focusing on the environmental opportunities to facilitate crime, situational crime prevention aims to anticipate criminal activity in line with its preemptive philosophy. So what that means is that there's a recognition that under certain circumstances, when the environment kind of aligns, that we might experience a motivation to commit crime. So under that logic, once more, everybody has the potential to commit crime. So situational crime prevention works off that philosophy that because everybody has the potential, then everybody should be viewed as, well, having that potential. So it's got a preemptive philosophy. Situational crime prevention assumes that everybody has that ability to commit crime. So under that assumption, something needs to be done. So this is covered in quite a few good textbooks. I've noted a few there. Sorry, it is cutting off at the bottom. It is Newburn, published in 2017. I always forget his first name, and I've used this book for years. Let me just have a wee look around. Can I see it in front of me? I can. It's Tim. I thought it was Tim. It's Tim Newburn. There's quite a few books that cover these theories, and again, I do supply bibliographies both in most of my articles, and whenever you guys are watching this, hopefully you'll have access to like the slides and stuff like that as well. And there's bibliographies at the end of each and every one of those. And again, if you've got access to them, the books through maybe your library services and what have you, fantastic. If not, they are available for purchase, but pricey, mine. But either way, if you are looking to invest in criminology books, there's a hopefully a good array in bibliographies, in my bibliography slides for you, in all the sources and all the materials I'm able to release. But as covered by Newburn, this kind of approach, this preemptive situational crime prevention approach, this philosophy, is rooted in things like rational choice and routine activities theories, as Clark and Felsen argued in 2011, highlighting shared principles between situational crime prevention and routine activities, in that they both view crime as a consequence of the interaction between people with criminal intent and those favorable situations. So they both view crime as a consequence of an interaction between people and favorable situations. They both view crime as a series of decision-making processes, and they both view crime as the result of a series or process of events. And finally, they both view, or rather hold the view, that crime can be reduced by changes made to the environment. So if these variables that come together as a motivating force, then direct and deliberate manipulation to the environment then can have a deterrent value. So it's described by the Fierce Clark in 1983. Situational crime prevention involves manipulating the environment to reduce the opportunities for crime and increase the risk associated with criminal activity. So it's taking directly from the earliest of classical theories, or philosophies rather, in that if I were to weigh up rationally the pros and the cons, this is about manipulating the environment to stack more cons, to make the cons of committing criminal behavior outweigh the pros of that behavior. So this approach assumes that everybody, again, is capable of committing a crime, and measures are not tailored to individuals, but rather the general population. So the indiscriminate nature of this approach treats everybody as that potential criminal. And in the 1970s, the UK Home Office and research commissioned by it found that adopting the policy of hardening targets, or target hardening, whichever way you want to describe it, was an effective approach to reducing criminal behavior. And this led to things like the creation of crime prevention units. So instead of just reacting to crime, the aim was to reduce the likelihood of it occurring to begin with. So research, this kind of research by the Home Office, influenced the developments of Oscar Newman's defensible spaces theory, which involves altering the environment to prevent crime, and also Hem Goldstein's problem-orientated policing. So Newman's theory primarily focused on urban and residential areas, where a sense of ownership and territorial attitudes could create crime deterrence. So whilst other theorists had expanded on Newman's ideas, his four key areas on defensible spaces, they still hold significant influence. So the consideration on territoriality in defining space in ways that encourage residents or property owners to defend their space, creating visible surveillance methods like CCTV and signage for neighborhood watches, and designing and maintaining buildings so that they don't look maybe run down or easily penetrable, are all factors that continue to hold considerable or considerations in security measures today. So, I mean, look, we saw an explosion a few decades ago in the use of CCTV. Signage warning people of, guard dogs on site, neighborhood watches, all sorts of, just signage to warn people that there is security operating. Buildings, say, not looking run down and what have you, or easily penetrable, is something that has been explored in a theory known as broken windows, and that's something that's going to pop up in weeks to come, this broken windows notion. But basically the general gist of it is that if an area looks like a shithole, then it's going to attract shithole behavior. And it has been researched, and there is positive correlations to this, that if there's money and rejuvenation put into certain rundown areas, then people's behavior within those areas tends to increase as well. So there's supporting evidence for that. Basically, the manipulation of the environment is very much a factor here in situational crime prevention, and this is showing in policy and practice. So critics, however, argue that Newman's theory falls short in several areas. For example, it fails to account for reputation building, which is crucial, critics argue, in creating the perception of a safe and secure area. So it takes time, the argument goes, to establish a good reputation. And this aspect of the theory needed further development. So it's all well and good coming in and rejuvenating. Let's say we're coming in and rejuvenating the building and putting up maybe walls and maybe a bit of barbed wire or something like that. I don't really know. Just sort of target hardening a particular area. Yeah, you're rejuvenating it, but you're also increasing the security mechanisms around that area. Critics argue then that that's not quite enough, at least not initially. That the mindset of better behavior in a no, we're not. If we move away from just talking about a single building or a couple of buildings beside each other to an entire neighborhood, it takes a lot more and a lot longer to change the mindsets of a community. So critics argue it's maybe a bit more complicated than just giving a building a lick of paint. All right. So look, additionally, Newman's theory does not consider, the argument goes, the impact of housing policies that were implemented in Britain after World War II. For example, in the United Kingdom, the New Towns Act of 1946, it aimed to provide more housing, but also relocated as well individuals from more crime-prone areas. So basically, there was a bit of an initiative from government at that time. We're going to have to rebuild following the war. And whilst we're at it, we've got still what can only be described as Victorian ghettos, really, and they're a bit crime-ridden. So let's try and break up these sort of areas and the sort of the crime mentality for creating new towns and new neighborhoods and what have you. Well, let's try and disperse the criminal mentality, not to make it other people's problems, but the idea was that the mentality could be broken and crime could be stemmed. So this policy was there, nevertheless, criticized for exacerbating crime rates by transferring problematic individuals to other areas, thereby creating new crime hotspots. So it did have that. I think there was a bit of logic, to be fair. I don't think it's completely, anybody listening to this might well think, well, yeah, of course that happened. We're going to move into theories, say the Chicago School and more environmental sociological theories in a few weeks' time. And there's evidence to support from the Chicago School that it is the geographical environment that people find themselves in that's more crime-inducing rather than the individuals themselves, albeit that does not rule out the fact that we do have criminal individuals. But there was a logic behind it. If we can break up the neighborhoods that are more sort of crime-riddled and move the people and disperse them, the crime intentions may not follow. I think it was a bit of a 50-50 for now, to be glib about it, but of a 50-50 on whether or not that would, for on each individual family, each individual household who's being moved, a 50-50 of whether that would work or not, because some people will just continue to be criminal, particularly if they are still poor and poverty-ridden wherever you move them to, whereas other people may flourish in a different environment and not turn back to crime. So again, taken on an individual basis. But nevertheless, the policy was criticized for basically shifting a crime problem and dispersing to other parts of the nation. So these limitations notwithstanding, Herman Goldstein's theory of problem-solving policing, that remains relevant to today as well, advocating for a proactive approach to policing that focuses on preventing crime and solving problems rather than simply reacting to incidences. So although some of these ideas, when it comes to crime prevention rather than reaction, may still seem basic, and we're going back to the 1960s, 70s, they were, again, nevertheless, groundbreaking to an extent some years ago. So we always rather need to remember or look at the dates, the eras in which these ideas are coming out, and just recognize, well, the eras in which they're coming out. So look, very quickly, analysing some of the key points of consideration for both rational choice and situational crime prevention. Regarding rational choice, questions have been asked regarding, do people actually or really calculate, benefit and cost? Because, of course, for a theory to become a fact, certain claims need to be well proven. And this one can't in absolute terms. Yes, it is sure to be applicable to a number of criminals and crimes, and the significant proportion of research would support that. But will it be applicable to all criminals? Will it be applicable to people who are committing criminal behavior but are quite clearly and diagnosably suffering from mental health issues, for example? So this, ability to weigh up rationally benefit and cost, does it apply to them? No, it can't. It's not a universal application. It doesn't have that. It's a weakness of it. So contemporary classicism also fails to consider crime beyond personal benefit, not giving much attention to maybe the excitement or the bravado of committing crime, which theories down the way for you on this channel do, like cultural criminology, for example. Further, it doesn't account for the structural conditions that situational crime prevention tends to consider, which leads me to situational crime prevention. So this considers that displacement in the sense that target hardening and crime interventions don't necessarily prevent crime. Instead, they displace it to another target that has weaker defenses, or to a different time when the situation has changed. So what I mean here, I'll break this down. So situational crime prevention, when we talk about displacement, if I owned a building and that building had a load of goods inside and I got robbed a couple of times, well, I'm probably going to build a wall, maybe put a bit of razor wire on top, good, strong, sturdy fence, CCTV, and I might hire a couple of security guards. That might well do the trick. That might well be the deterrent needed so that the persistent theft that is occurring stops, because it becomes